Hi everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a really interesting conversation around inclusive design. I'm Miroslava, head of design here at MIMI, and I'm today joined by Professor Jonathan Hassell, who is founder and CEO of Hassell Inclusion, a consultancy who assists organizations around the world to remove barriers in digital technology. Thank you for joining me today, Jonathan.
It's my pleasure. I'm really delighted to be with you.
Can you maybe start by telling me a bit about why you started Hassell Inclusion and your passion for inclusion design?
Yeah, absolutely. So my passion for inclusive design really started, two things happened at the same time around about the turn of the millennium. First thing was my nephew Carl was born. So he was born with spina bifida. So what that means is that he uses a wheelchair. He has a slight autism and slight learning difficulty. For me, issues around disability became a personal thing in our family. The other thing was I started working at the BBC. It was my job to try and help the BBC get their websites initially, and then mobile apps and everything else after that. A good quality for everybody. And so I was trying to help find and define best practice for what a good website was. And thankfully, the BBC already had a whole history of working to make sure that TV worked for people with a disability. And they wanted the same thing for the website. So that was one part of my job. And then over kind of the course of about 10 years when I was at the BBC, it became more and more part of my job. I ended up writing the British standards for accessibility, around about sort of 10 years later, so around about 2010, as those standards were coming out, I kind of felt that my job at the BBC had been done. The BBC really were doing a brilliant job. I had a great team. So I handed over to my successor, because what I wanted to do was to help lots of other organizations who really didn't have a clue. We now had a British standard. They needed some help in implementing it. So I set up Hassell Inclusion to enable that to happen.
Over the last few years, there is definitely a growing focus on inclusion in digital solution. Why is inclusive design so important in today's environment?
Yeah, so I'm hoping it's because it's for all of the good reasons rather than the kind of the bad reasons. If you like, the bad reasons were the kind of legal stuff. And yes, there are legal things there. You know, companies, if they get this wrong, can be sued in most countries in the world. That doesn't really inspire anybody. And what we're about is the benefits that come from this. That's why we believe that this is so important. So just to give you some of the stats, just in case anybody who's watching doesn't get them, about 20% of the population of most countries have a disability. About 20% have an accessibility need, not because they have a disability, but because they're aging. For example, someone like my mum, you know, she's not blind, she's not disabled, but she can't read books the way she used to because she's 81 and her sight is going. For her, something like an iPad is a perfect way of reading because it's got its own backlight and she can make the text bigger. Suddenly technology becomes an enabler. And that really is what we're talking about here. It's about how to make sure that everybody can use technology because at the moment, especially with the pandemic, digital is pretty much everything. You know, I shop digitally, I work digitally, I do my entertainment digitally, and I'm not unusual. I am the country, you know, when it comes to that and the world. So it's really about saying, how does everybody, you know, whether you are a business and you want to make sure that you've maximized all of your customers who are now all online, you know, how do you get all of your customers? Well, say, for example, if we just take my mum, she's using her iPad. That's working really well for her. And up until last year, she did all of her shopping in supermarkets. She then kind of the pandemic happens and she wants to shop online. And so rather than disturb me, because she's a very independent sort, she tries to use the website of the supermarket that she normally shops at. And she can't make head nor tail of it. And over 3 hours on a call center with a real kind of like angel on that call center, 3 hours of taking my mum through that website, she was able to do her first shop. So, God bless that person who did that. But that's too expensive for that organization. They can't spend 3 hours with every older person. So if you can make websites that are actually much easier to understand by people who are older, as well as everybody else who has an access need, then you're really making sure that everybody is able to do digital in a way that they need to at the moment. So yeah, those are just some of the reasons why this is so important, I think.
Definitely agree. From your perspective and your experience in the field, are you starting to see a change in how companies approach inclusive design and accessibility?
Yeah. So my job as somebody who, if you like, makes my living out of accessibility and my team's living, used to be all about trying to get people to do it. And, I'm still doing a certain amount of that. What we're finding is much smaller companies are now coming to us, a lot of charities saying, yeah, we think we should do this. Why? What have we got to gain from it? So we're still doing benefits workshops. Most of the big companies know that if they don't do this, they're in real trouble. Not real trouble just legally, but also real trouble in terms of who their brand is. If we think about what happened last year with Black Lives Matter, it became really important for companies to get their diversity and inclusion right. And diversity and inclusion has to include people with disabilities. Organizations like the Valuable 500 are doing great job out there with lots of different companies saying, yeah, we get that. If we do diversity and inclusion without thinking about people with disabilities, that's not right. So we need to include everybody in there. The reason why that is such a challenge, though, is that for a lot of the people who are included when it comes to diversity and inclusion, the thing that you are, if you like, pushing against is a lack of awareness, maybe, of bias and things like that. But also, if you like, people's misunderstanding of their own prejudice. But once they get over that, there aren't really very many technical difficulties that you need to get over. Maybe you need to have a gender neutral toilet, but other than that, it's pretty much all about people, if you like, making sure that people understand that this is important. When it comes to people with a disability, there are lots of, if you like, kind of technical things that come with an organization saying, we want to make sure that people who have a disability can shop with us. We want to make sure that people with a disability are able to be our staff. Then it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we need to change the way our technology works so that someone who's blind can do our online booking systems, can do Zoom that we're doing now? How does somebody who has a hearing impairment, so is maybe hard of hearing or deaf, how are they able to be recruited into a business, and how are they able to work with their colleagues both digitally and back when we're in the workforce on site? So it's about how all of these things come together. And certainly what we're finding is the big companies are saying, this is just a no-brainer, we have to do this. So these days, it's not so much about us telling people why they should do it, it's actually enabling organizations to know how to do it, and how to do it in a way which is really efficient, because a lot of money has been wasted, especially when it comes to web accessibility. What we have is a way of enabling people to start getting good at this. So that's why we're about, I think.
And maybe at that point, what do you see as a state of accessibility for those specifically with hearing difficulties in technology today and in the digital space?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what I would say is that for most people who do anything digitally, they probably know that they should be doing captions. They've seen that on the telly, you know, all of that sort of thing. They probably don't know very much about things beyond that, really. You know, so if I've got a video, yeah, it should have some captions. That's the place where most people start. I've actually been training a lot of people for one of our major clients at the moment who work in campaign management. So these are people who create marketing campaigns, and marketing campaigns can be everything from you know, an advert that you hear on the radio or see on the TV, you know, something that is next to you as a poster on a bus stop, and then all the way through to what you see on social media and on a website. And it's really important to kind of understand how that reality actually plays out with a lot of people who have you know, different needs. So for example, for people who have hearing difficulties, most of that is no problem at all. You know, your average website is absolutely fine until it has something which is to do with audio. So it could be a company's created a podcast, or they're doing a lot more on video. A lot of it will be coming via social media. And so people aren't necessarily thinking about this because it isn't web, if you like. If it appears on my website, it's, you know, isn't there a law for that? But if it's on social media or on the TV, or on YouTube, I'm not sure. Well, actually, it's as important. And actually, what we're finding is that more and more people are doing stuff with video and audio. So for people with a hearing difficulty, it becomes massively important, not just that there are captions or a transcript, but also things like, you know, the first thing that I learned at the BBC, listening to our audiences, was that the #1 complaint, if you like, that came from BBC audiences was that they couldn't hear the person speaking on the telly. And it wasn't that they weren't speaking clearly enough, but it was because there was some background music to make it really exciting. You know, the headlines from the news is what I was playing to all of these folks yesterday, and saying actually a lot of people who are older, who are losing their hearing in the top registers, they hear all of your background music, but they can't hear the person speaking. That's the important thing. You know, by making it dramatic and interesting, you've made it harder to hear.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, that's pretty new to everybody in the world. That's not there in WCAG, but it's a fundamental thing that I learned from my experience there. So, and I understand it's the sort of things that, you know, you're working on at Mimi, which is how do you enable people who still have some hearing to get that hearing optimized for their personal circumstances. That's really, really important. But you won't find it, if you like, in WCAG or things like that. So the other thing that's happening at the moment is a bit of kind of democratizing of these sorts of needs because of artificial intelligence. So 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen lots of captioned video on YouTube. Now it automatically captions things. So the things that we're saying to people is it's not about do you have captions, it's how good are your captions. Yes. You know, again, I was playing to the folks yesterday. So Otter.ai is one of the brilliant tools out there that can do automated transcripts. Actually, if you are using Zoom, then if you turn that on in, so if you link Zoom and Otter AI together, you can have automated captions for your webinars. We do this every month. But what we found is that the captions quality isn't great. It's better in Google Meet. Microsoft Teams is also really good. But what we found is nothing beats a stenographer. So we're using cart services to make the quality of what we are doing in captions better. So it's that sort of thing, really. It's about saying there are some really great, new technologies, but are they delivering quality, or are they just enabling people to say, we've ticked the captions box because we never really checked to see if it was any good? That sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely agree on that point. And I would be curious, do you have maybe any advice on how companies can raise awareness and maybe better support the inclusion of people with hearing loss or hard of hearing in their digital technology?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's what I was doing yesterday. It's training. We spend a great majority of our time at Hassell Inclusion training people. We believe that the thing that's kind of been wrong, if there has been a critique of the accessibility industry, is that it's all been about testing. Testing a product, normally a little bit too late in its creation, to see how bad it is. And that's just not efficient. For us, it's about training people to do it right, not testing products and telling people they've got it wrong. The first thing empowers people, the second thing depresses people. And so we're about the empowerment, not the depression. And for us, the really important thing is, is raising awareness. So why should you do this? Inviting organizations to have a conversation with somebody who has a disability. We do something that we call speed dating as one of the services that we do to enable organizations to get better awareness. Loads of people don't think they've ever met somebody with a disability. Chances are they're wrong. Chances are they've met loads. They just weren't aware of that, because a lot of disabilities aren't obviously visual. If it's 1 in 6 people who have a hearing impairment in the country, then it's only the ones who are signing or have a hearing aid in their ear that you would know, have a difficulty hearing. Other people, you may not know. But also the other thing that is there is that people have never had the chance to really go deep with that. So our speed dating, over the course of a couple of hours, we give opportunities for people in a company to meet somebody with different types of different disability, and say, what's it like to be a hearing impaired person using our website? What do you find about it? What could be improved? All of these things. And we do that for vision impairments, for people who are autistic, dyslexic, all of these different things. It's really, really helping people. And then from there, they're like, okay, how do we get good at this? And that's the training. So that is, what we would suggest is the right way forwards.
And maybe as a last question of today's interview, what you would like to see to be done to ensure technology and digital products and services we use daily to be as inclusive and accessible as possible?
So at this point, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of an advert, if you like, for the international standard that we wrote to do just that. So it's 30071 Part 1. So ISO 30071-1 is the international standard that pretty much I've spent my entire career for the last 20 years creating. So the 10 years while I was at the BBC was all about getting the BBC good, and then sharing that with British Standard BS 8878. So I pulled together people in other companies and says, what's working for you? What's working here? What's working there? How do we get something which is a blueprint for companies to get good at this? That came out in 2010. ISO 30071 Part 1 is the internationalized version. So I spent 9 years working with people all over the world, really, saying, okay, this worked in the UK, could it work here? That's the real thing. So, there are a lot of things that I would call cheap, quick fix accessibility that are being sort of really aggressively sold in accessibility at the moment. So, if you want to get good at accessibility in your organization, can you buy a tool that makes the problem go away? Unfortunately, the answer is no. You know, these tools are like the equivalent, I don't know if you know much about the Toyota way, but Toyota looked at the car industry and quality in the car industry about 20 years ago and kind of said, what happens was everyone gets it wrong, and then at the end they fix it, and then they realize that this isn't efficient. What they should be doing is getting quality all the way through the process. These kind of tools where, you know, you have a website that isn't accessible, and you can kind of like put this tool on it and it makes your website accessible. Even if the AI is perfect, which it isn't, and it can't get you all the way to the place you want it to be. Even if that were the case, you would still be continuing to create a website that was dreadful and relying on a tool to fix it for you. That's just not efficient. That's not the professional way of doing any job. Get it wrong, fix it, doesn't work for efficiency. So what we're all about to say is, we want people to understand the sort of stuff which is there in the ISO. You know, what are the benefits for the organization? You know, how deep should they go into this? You know, because how much have they got to get out of it? Different companies have got different benefits that they could get. So understanding why we should do this. The next thing is embedding it into the organization. So how do we make sure that our policies are right? That diversity and inclusion policy links in with that accessibility bit of work that's happening over here in the company. You know, are we doing stuff for customers and staff, or are we just doing them for one of those things? If we're a digital agency and we're brilliant at accessibility, how do we know how to tell our potential clients that we are really good at accessibility, and we can actually create them a great website? You know, what is the process for creating a great website? You know, do you just need technical guidelines like WCAG, or do you need to know how to get the best from all of the different people in the team, the developers, the designers? What does the product manager need to do to manage all of this? That's the next part of the standard. Then once we've got good, you know, we're doing really good stuff, are we counting what the benefit was to our organization? Do we know how many people who have a disability are actually using our stuff? I've been to organizations where they were brilliant at accessibility like 20 years ago. They then got really bad at it because they kind of forgot it. Nobody thought it was of any value, and they're now asking us to come in to sort them out again. We don't want to have to keep on doing that. We want people to get good and know why that was a sensible thing to do as a business. And then we need them to keep up to speed with the increasing sort of changes in technology all of the time. You know, it's really important to make sure that if there's a new JavaScript library or a new device that's come out at the CES show, for example, how do you do accessibility for robots? You know, we've got a robot vacuum cleaner that we control via a mobile app. How would that work for somebody with a disability? You know, all of these sorts of things where technology moves on. And actually, some of the stuff you're doing, so, you know, we find that a lot of companies find when they start thinking about the needs of somebody with a disability, it's really quite challenging. It's not something that they've thought of before, but actually some of the ideas that come from actually really engaging with that can be the things that make them more innovative as a company. So all of these sorts of things are what accessibility, I think, has to offer organizations. And so that's the sort of stuff that we really want people to get good at. And just one little thing, we really do mean it. I wrote a book, in fact, 2 books on this subject, and I'm really, really happy if anyone's reading this, watching this, reading underneath it. You've agreed to put a link there. If you click on that link, it'll take you to our website where you can put in your email, and we'll send you a free digital copy of my book. As I say, we want people to get good at this. We want this to be something that isn't quite so mysterious. We don't have to do quite so much comms like this, that it's just the way people create digital stuff, really.